Right now, on a regular Friday, just like today, 4 weeks to the day, the nation changed. But the question is, how much did it really? If there is still not an appetite for an assault weapons ban, what will it take to change hearts and minds? We'll discuss. And next, it's been 75 days since Sandy slammed into our region, but still, there's some back and forth in D.C. about how much money and what strings attached ought to be there before the states get the money, all the money they need to get back to rebuilding. And later, not one guy was let into the Hall of Fame this week, sending a real strong message to players. But what does it mean here for the future, not only of baseball, but future of the Hall of Fame? What happens a year from now? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us this Friday evening, January 11th. Now, it was a Friday. 4 weeks to the day. I know it seems longer than that, but that's all that it was. 28 days ago when the nation stood still. The second deadliest school shooting in American history. 26 dead, and as you know, 20 of them children. Since then, our nation, it's come to know the faces of the fallen. We watched as those tiny caskets, one after another, were placed into the ground by those grieving families in a grieving community, and in many ways, a grieving nation. It's estimated that since the Newtown shooting, at least 695 people have been killed by guns in the U.S., and yet it still appears that an assault weapon ban will be politically tricky at best. Some reports indicated earlier today that the White House would leave the assault weapons ban altogether out of the plan for fear it wouldn't pass Congress. The White House this afternoon strongly denied it. But opposition to the idea is very real. The White House, they met with the NRA yesterday, a meeting the organization said was spent attacking the Second Amendment. They issued a statement saying, among other things, quote, "We will not allow law-abiding gun owners to be blamed for the acts of criminals and madmen." Now, this morning, the NRA's president called assault weapon ban a feel-good proposal.
We don't think that a ban on so-called assault weapons, which hasn't worked in the past, is going to work this time. We think many of those proposals are basically feel-good proposals.
So, if I said to you a month ago that we may or may not, when it's all said and done, have an assault weapons ban, what would you have said to me? How do we go from there 4 weeks ago to here tonight? I want to bring in our panel on this. We've got Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, who you always know. Tom Doherty, former advisor to Governor George Pataki, now a partner with Mercury Public Strategies, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And from my vantage point, good and decent people can disagree about gun control, where the limits are to start and stop. A little bit later in the segment, we'll talk about some of the tone that even I find surprising that's come out of this conversation. But I've had these debates before, Dom, but I don't know why I underestimated it, but I really thought, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I really thought it wasn't going to be that hard. I thought the other things were going to be more difficult, but an assault weapons ban I wouldn't have thought was going to be politically that difficult after a tragedy that was unimaginable in America, even though maybe it shouldn't have been.
In fairness to Washington, Richard, anything out of the nation's capital these days is extremely difficult. So let's start with that premise. Number two, I just don't see how this can get done without at least putting on the table a ban on assault weapons. President Clinton gave a speech yesterday and used this stat, and I want you to think about this. I don't know how accurate it is, but he's the president from the assault weapons ban. And President Clinton said that half of all mass killings have occurred since the assault weapons ban expired here in the U.S. Half. So that's just something to think about. There's no way politically that this can get done without putting the ban on the table.
You know, Tom, we had Chris Shays, the congressman from Connecticut, who co-authored the assault weapons ban. He was the first to admit that he said, you know, I'm not sure how much it worked. But I argue that even if, and it's not the whole answer, not even a huge part of it, but it's the right thing to do after this, that you have to take steps. And one of the things is, these guns don't belong with the general population. General McChrystal, not a bleeding heart, was like, this is stuff that belongs in the battlefield, not on the streets of America. And I just, again, I miscalculated it yet again, But I really thought that there was an appetite to get what I don't think was the hard part with the assault weapons ban. That I thought we could get that through without it being a huge political fight, but obviously I was wrong.
I think you're wrong because of the complexity of this issue. I have spent a lot of time over the last 28 days speaking with people who will take your position and avid gun owners who have taken a much different position. All of them law-abiding gun owners. For instance, under the previous assault weapons ban, the AR-15, which was used in the Newtown killings, would not have been banned under the previous assault weapons ban. There seems to be a real, here's what I think the country needs to go through, and we don't have an open televised dialogue on this, where we talk about these issues in terms of, I have no clue what it means when someone says we need an assault weapons ban. What does that mean?
It means different things to different people.
And so it shouldn't mean different things to different people. It should mean one thing. And until the nation, because whether you're a Republican or Democrat, and Democrats, will tend to be more, let's get rid of guns, et cetera. But it is universal that we have millions upon millions of Americans who own weapons in this country. There's no question about it. And they take that very serious. I have taken a little bit different approach, is that I do think is that we need a serious dialogue about background checks. To me, it's preposterous that anybody who goes to buy a weapon doesn't go through a serious background check. That includes mental health issues. Have you been on a prescription drug over the last year? Are you a schizophrenic, et cetera, et cetera? And until we have televised hearings almost about this, we are not going to reach a conclusion that makes us better. Because, as you know, we're not taking people's guns from them.
No, that was never on the table.
Of course it's not. But when you do this on emotion, and what happens is, 28 days ago this happened. The president asked Joe Biden to do it. All the different things that come up during the meantime, et cetera, is that until we do some real intelligent, bring all the groups together, have televised hearings, explain what this means, we're not going to accomplish anything.
The number, 28 days, for example, we always use the 5-week rule. That if you don't do something in 5 weeks, it escapes the public's consciousness, or at least goes in the back of it. The longer this takes,
no question,
the more difficult it is to get something meaningful.
Which should show you that it is. We're in the Northeast, okay. I was just down in Florida, and with college students who were tailgating nearby, who had Glocks. These were 23-year-old kids who had Glocks, and you're not. And they were from Alabama. You're not taking.
You went to the championship
game.
I'm sorry you spent a lot of money in that game, but my point is, you're drinking at the games.
Well, listen, and again, is that I was not those type of individuals. I'm less concerned with. I'm more concerned with people who have not been certified. The background checks are shabby. They're not well thought out, et cetera, et cetera. Because if you look at all of these killings, isn't it interesting the type of individuals involved in these mass shootings? They always clearly have some type of mental health issue. Always have a mental health issue, and we don't talk about that.
For example, Andrew met with the vice president did with the video game industry today, and that's a small part. There's no panacea to all of this, but I'm just saying from the smell test, we know down deep that this country will be fine if we take assault weapons out of the hands of the general population. And I know they define them different definitions, but when people start talking about modifications and stuff, you just want to go, stop. Down deep what we're talking about. When you see it, you know it. But yet, even a tragedy like Newtown, my gosh, even after Newtown, we're having the same circular conversation.
This may be an oversimplification, but for years the NRA has given the line, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And it's an arguable point. I don't agree with it, but it's certainly an arguable point. For the purposes of this conversation, though, that point hasn't been reversed. Nobody has clearly established that the guns are as much a part of the problem as the people who are operating them themselves. And because you haven't convinced people of it, people are reverting back to their positions before Newtown. They're away from the emotion of the moment, and they're coming back to their old entrenched positions. Okay. We haven't had that conversation.
And to that point, Andrew, as much as I'm surprised that 4 weeks later to the day, there's already a change in tone here from the outrage that was there the days after. But there's already been, which surprises me again, and I was wrong again. I thought when we saw the silence from the NRA and the immediate aftermath of it, that the tone would be, let's go a little slow here, but not this indignation from the gun rights groups. Like, how dare anybody talk about guns as part of the problem? And we have seen a growing theme from some here in the Second Amendment crowd that any discussion, just a conversation towards some form of gun restrictions has been met with stuff like this.
Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
They perpetuate the dangerous notion that one more gun ban or one more law imposed on peaceable, lawful people will protect us. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
That if African Americans had been given the right to keep and bear arms from day one of the country's founding, perhaps slavery might not have been a chapter in our history.
Vice President Biden is asking the president to bypass Congress and use executive privilege, executive order to ban assault rifles. I'm telling you that if that happens, it's going to spark a civil war, and I'll be glad to fire the first shot. I'm not putting up with it. You shouldn't put up with it. And I need all you patriots to start thinking about what you're going to do. Load your damn mags, make sure your rifle's clean, pack a backpack with some food in it, and get ready to fight.
I'll give you the answer on this, Richard, because I thought long about this. The problem is that we're confronting is those gun owners are not the problem in this country. They're defending the right to bear arms, and what they look at is that I am a law-abiding citizen. I'm not out going to kill somebody. Wait a second, Dominic. Let me. Okay, Dominic. Dominic, let me finish the point. Dominic,
I'm stomaching as much as I can. The right to bear arms. How many arms? How many arms do you need? Do you need 5? Do you need 5 guns? Do you need 10?
Dominic,
do you need an assault weapon? How about that?
Dominic, here's the point, though, that I'm trying to make is someone who has. I'm a reasonable person about this. I think we should limit the amount of mags. I think that we should trace bullets, et cetera, et cetera. I'm for a lot of things that my gun friends would say, screw you. I'm more in the let's do some serious reforms on these sort of things because I tend to agree that there are weapons out there that I just don't think that the founding fathers, when you have a right to bear arms, said we should bear those arms. But the people that are most vocal about this, they're not the people we have to worry about.
So those nuts we just heard from, we don't have to worry about those
They're
folks?
not involved. Listen, show me the last time a member of the NRA went out and slaughtered 20 people. That doesn't happen. These are weapons that get in the hands of mentally deranged young people.
You know what? So you might be right, Tom, but here's my thing.
Wayne LaPierre's not killing anybody.
And I had an interview with a guy who's got more than 300,000 members, Larry Pratt. You've probably seen that, okay? And I took an approach where I just let him talk. I wasn't going to yell him. I've done that before. Been there, done that. And I guess my only point is, I didn't expect a major concession from these guys. They believe that, slippery slope. You do one change, okay.
That's the concern.
But what I said was, and I gave them every chance, I go, there was a gun buyback where they took back 75 assault weapons and 2 bazookas. I go, Larry.
Right.
I go, Larry, where's the line? Right. And he goes, founding fathers, they talked about a militia. I go, bazookas? He goes, bazookas. That's right. So then I said, okay, guns. You want to put a gun in a school with an armed guard? I disagree with these guys. I'm not as opposed to it as everybody else, okay? But I go, the lunch lady? Absolutely. I go, what if there's a senior in high school who's 18? He goes, let him pack heat.
We agree.
Then I say, what if you're on that terror watch list? And he says, hey, you know what? Due process. And I said, terror watch list. Right. So what I'm getting at is, if the side that you said isn't the really folks you got to worry that much about, if there's not a scintilla of acknowledgement that 20 little kids were killed, that we should do something different. Maybe not as much as I think, but something. How do you have a rational conversation?
Because what you need to do when you start the conversation is not make gun owners feel like you're coming to take their guns. And what you need to do is to the point that you just make, which I make to my friends. You don't have a right to bear a bazooka. We don't want a teacher in a high school carrying a gun in a high school. Now, do you want to have an armed guard, a former police officer guarding you? I'm all for that's fine with me. Half the schools in America have some type of armed guard. You got to start there. You got to start with reasonable stuff that, listen, the vast majority of America, I don't care if you're a member of the NRA. The thought that you should be able to go to a corner store and buy a bazooka is ridiculous.
Everything that you said is rational, but what Tom is proposing, or acknowledging, I should probably say, is what a lot of people say is the only thing that's going to get through now is incremental approaches. First of all, I think, Andrew, the president kind of promised more than that in his address. And I think even if he doesn't get it done, he owes it at least to the people that he said to try for something much bigger. Now, the White House today said that they will be talking, the assault weapons ban will be part of the proposal. But I don't know. I don't think that you lose for trying much larger than small incremental things, even if they're an improvement. And even if that's the only thing that get passed, I think you owe for a bigger conversation. And I know that we've debated this one.
Ask Al Gore that question. I mean, Al Gore will tell you that, that going back to his presidential election, the reason he lost the presidential election was because of what he said about
That's not
guns.
why Al Gore lost. Al Gore, no offense, Mr. Gore, Al Gore was a bad candidate. That's why he lost. It has nothing to do with
really?
guns.
Well, you know,
and you know that,
according
Tom,
to the
you're
vote
an
total, he
expert.
lost Florida by a small handful.
Let me bring this back to guns. First of all, if you honestly believe that guns are contributing to the bloodshed that we're seeing, and I certainly do, then you'll take whatever steps you can get. Would it be better to have an assault weapons ban? Yes. Is it better politically for the White House to try for it and have it rejected? I'm not sure. You may be right in terms of, no harm done by overreaching, but you'll take whatever you can get if you honestly think that the proliferation of guns on the streets are killing
Yeah,
other
it is sad.
Hey,
And the reason why it's sad,
but it's one life at a
No,
time. And going
no.
back to those nut jobs that we saw on the clip, is the language that we're hearing from gun advocates really that more hyperbolic than what we're hearing all across our political discourse these days?
No.
When tax reform is redistribution and socialism,
No, but he talked about an armed revolt,
which we heard from the Tea Party too.
Okay, but wait, but here's my thing.
Tea Party.
My point is, where the 75% of the NRA members believe in some kind of a database, yet their leader goes out there and says, more guns in schools, that's the only thing that we'll do. My point is, where are the outraged gun owners in this country, the responsible ones that you're talking about, who maybe they won't go as far as I would like here, but they don't believe what those guys said, but they're not standing up and saying, and by the way, where are the rational Republicans? Do they really need to live that much in fear of the NRA? I mean, they didn't do anything in November.
But Richard, please.
They don't agree with these guys like Wayne LaPierre.
But Richard, please stop saying Republicans, okay? Because that's just unfair to Republicans. Again, and I've said this many times in this show, every time I hear about these new ideas, you controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency for 2 years when Obama got elected. We did not hear one word about guns.
Newtown happened 4 weeks ago.
But forget Newtown. We've had massacres in this country over the last 30, 40 years.
Newtown.
I'm just saying is that
it couldn't have happened in his first term. It couldn't, and you know the political
And
landscape
if you were
better
advising
than
the
anybody
president,
here.
you wouldn't have told him to take on that
then
issue in the first 2 years.
But again, then he's not serious about what he thinks. Then why are we taking the man serious at all?
So guys, can I put a bone on this? Do we think Tuesday, when there's whatever they lay out, even if they go big or go small, at the end of the day, if there is any tangible reform, it'll be incremental. It won't be
incremental.
That's it.
Incremental.
You agree with him?
I don't know. The proposal will be big. I don't know what's going to happen.
I think it's
The
going to
result.
It's going to depend on who the messenger is, and it can't be the president or Michael Bloomberg or somebody. If they figure out a way to sell this to the moms out there in America, maybe you're right.
You know, it'll be very interesting, Richard, to see what happens in New York, because if the governor of New York is able to bring Republican Senate members on board,
you know this better than me, but they say that 95% of them are there.
So if they are able to come up, and again, New York's much different than Alabama, but if New York Republicans are able to work with the governor on a reasonable, something that people can buy into, that might be a signal going forward.
Okay. We jump to a break. When we come back, we're going to be switching gears to Sandy and the aftermath of the storm in our region. But I want you to keep the conversation going online about guns. Go to Facebook and Twitter. And here's the question. Do you think we ought to bring back the assault weapons ban? Now, when we do come back, it has been 75 days since Sandy crashed into our region and changing the landscape still to this day. But the question is, what's D.C. doing about it, especially showing the region the money? We'll talk about that after this.